Kuomintang party was not a product of any sudden outburst of Chinese nationalism. It was the product of a number of the activities of a number of organizations, political organizations, secret societies, etc., and all of which contributed in some way or other to the making of the revolution of 1911. And the aim of all these secret societies and organizations was to get rid of Manchu domination and to set up a republican form of government in China. And the leader of this revolutionary movement, of course, was Sun Yat-sen. The name Kuomintang was introduced after the revolution. Initially, it was known as Tung Meng-hui before 1911, and after that, after 1911, it changed its name into Kuomintang. It also adopted the policy of fighting feudalism, fighting imperialism. This aim, this policy was quite in agreement with the policy of the Communist Party, so the basis for a united front had already been prepared sometime after 1911. The revolution of 1911 was an incomplete bourgeois democratic revolution. As we have pointed out, it was earlier known as Tung Meng-hui and then it became Kuomintang. But it was not just a change in name. There was also a change in character. The earlier organization Tung Meng-hui, it was a very much a political organization, revolutionary, not only political, it was very much a revolutionary organization. But the new Kuomintang party brought within its fold not only revolutionaries, but also those who were not revolutionaries. So both revolutionaries and non-revolutionaries were there within the Kuomintang party. After 1911 revolution, Sun Yat-sen could not unify China, which was his main aim, and so he resigned from presidency in favor of Yuan Shikai in early 1912. After the founding of the republic, Yuan Shikai devoted attention to building up a military dictatorship in China. When it became clear that Yuan Shikai had already betrayed the revolution, Sun Yat-sen launched his second revolution against Yuan Shikai, which was directed against a dictator, and he mobilized his army in South China. But this uprising was suppressed after months of fighting, and the main reason for this failure was that agrarian demands were not highlighted, these were not addressed at that time. And after gaining victory, Yuan Shikai also banned Kuomintang party. With the outbreak of the First World War, China stood face to face with a series of new problems. Japan, as you know, fought on the side of the Allied troops in the First World War. And only one battle was fought between Germany and Japan, and it was fought in the Shantung province of China, and there Japan came out victorious. Because of the difficult situation prevailing in China at that time, Japan was faced with the prospect of converting all China into her own colony. Not only Shantung, but all China into her own colony. And it was in this context that Japanese minister to China, Hioki Eki, presented the infamous 21 demands to the Chinese government. And actually, it implied that if those demands were accepted, then large parts of the Chinese territory would be colonized, directly came under Japanese colonial control. And this led to a social ferment, an intellectual awakening or revolution, which ultimately came to be known as a May 4th movement. Meanwhile, political crisis within China had intensified as never before. Now the Peking government, it was a very weak Peking government, and so it enjoyed only nominal power. And the military forces of Yuan Shikai got split up into two parts, and the post of the president and the place of the capital had been shifting from the hands of one military group to another. And those military groups were under the control of imperialist powers. One but two at least. Two was were under control of Japanese imperialism. Another was backed by the British and US imperialism, and this period was known in history as the period of the warlords, warlordism. That's an age of the warlords in the history of China, and it was a foreign powers which supplied money to those cliques, Chinese cliques, in Anhui province or in Hubei province or Manchurian region, and it was through this that the imperialist powers exercised much control over large parts of the Chinese territory. Now, after the death of Yuan Shikai, Sun Yat-sen returned to China from abroad, and he opposed China's joining the First World War. He opposed it. And he declared that China could only take part in the war that was directed against all forms of imperialist control over China. And with that end in view, he established his own revolutionary government in Canton, but this government was very short-lived. Meanwhile, changes had also been taking place in the thinking of Sun Yat-sen. By then, October Revolution had already taken place. He was much influenced by the Russian Revolution, and from 1921 he started studying the nature, the implications of the Russian Revolution. The Communist Party of China was born in 1921, and which was an entirely new social force, new social and political force. And Sun Yat-sen started conversations both with the CPC as also with the Soviet leaders. And in this way, he drastically revised his own opinion also. He formulated his three major policies, which are very important. One was alliance with the Soviet Union, then alliance with the Communist Party of China, and the third was assistance to the workers and peasants. Side by side, he also revised his three principles of the people in accordance with the changing situation. In a changing situation, nationalism no longer meant the substitution of Chinese for the Manchu rule, because the Manchu rule was no longer there. And its new content was opposition to all imperialist control. It was a new content, a definite anti-imperialist content, which was not there before 1911. And there was another important content, that was full equality of all nationalities in China. Democracy, of course, is to be shared by the common people, and it should not be controlled by a minority of people. Livelihood, once more, was centered on the demand of land to the tillers, and which enabled Sun Yat-sen to make an appeal to the Chinese peasantry, which was not there in the earlier period. And then the right of the workers to organization and decent wages and working conditions, these were also recognized by Sun Yat-sen. Now, it was on this basis that the first united front was formed with the Communist Party of China, or the CPC, 1924 to 1927. And a revolutionary government was set up in Canton, again by Sun Yat-sen, and it also established a military academy known as the Huampua Military Academy with the Kuomintang officer Chiang Kai-shek as the KMT representative, and Zhou Enlai from the side of the Communist Party. So both were represented in the Huampua Military Academy, and the main aim of the Huampua Military Academy was to train commanders of a new type for the formation of a anti-warlord army to fight against the northern warlords. And so the port city of Canton, it became the center of the revived hopes and aspirations of the Chinese people from then on. Now, during that period, important changes had been taking place in the international scene. Changes which also influenced the decisions of the CPC. Now, in the second Congress of the Comintern, which is known as the Third International, which was held in 1920, Lenin came out a thesis which is known as a thesis on colonial questions. And there he referred to the relationships between the Communist Party or the workers and peasants movements or organizations with bourgeois democracy in those countries, in the underdeveloped countries. And his proposal, his thesis was that the communist parties or the workers and peasants in the underdeveloped countries can forge alliance with the bourgeoisie, but they should not merge with it, and they should always retain their own spirit of retain their own initiative and independent course of action. That is known as a colonial thesis, or the thesis on colonial questions. In the third Congress of the CPC, held in 1923 in the city of Canton, this thesis, Lenin's thesis, was discussed. There were debates in the CPC Congress over what should be the attitude, policy of the CPC towards the Kuomintang, which was at that time led by Sun Yat-sen. There were three opinions. One was represented by Chen Tu-siu, who was a general secretary of the CPC at that time. Chen Tu-siu maintained that Chinese revolution was a two-stage revolution. The first was the bourgeois democratic revolution. Second would be a socialist revolution. And since China at that point of time was in the first stage, so this bourgeois democratic revolution would have to be led by the bourgeoisie, that is by the Kuomintang, and the working class should only, or the Communist Party should play only a very secondary role, insignificant role, and not the leading role. They have never the leading role. And it is only after the bourgeois democratic revolution would be accomplished and the socialist revolution would begin, it was from then on that working class should come to the fore to take the leadership. The other point of view was represented by Chiang Kuo-tao. According to, he represented a left line, quote unquote left line. Now, Chiang Kuo-tao refused to believe that it was a two-stage revolution. It was a single one-stage revolution, and the leadership would be given by the working class, and there was no need to forge any alliance with the Kuomintang, because the Kuomintang party was very much a reactionary party. So we need not forge any alliance with the Kuomintang party. That was the view of Chiang Kuo-tao. Now, third opinion was represented, among others, by Mao Zedong, Ho Shu-heng, and Chu Chiu-pai at that time. They criticized both these standpoints. Mao Zedong pointed out that the first opinion, represented by Chen Tu-siu, would lead to capitulationism to the bourgeoisie, and the second opinion was nothing but sectarianism. And both these lines were criticized, and they advocated that the Communist Party, of course, should forge an alliance with the Kuomintang, but should try to retain their own spirit of action, and should also, at the same time, organize their political cells, their party committees in as many areas as possible. And majority of the leading members, they ultimately accepted Mao's proposal, and so decision was taken to do in this way. And so it was on this basis, from the side of the CPC, we have already dealt with the side of the Kuomintang, Sun Yat-sen's point of view. Now we have dealt with the point of view of the CPC. So both the parties agreed, coming from different through their own internal reasons, they came to the same conclusion that if a united front should be forged, and that we should jointly fight against the northern warlords. Now, meanwhile, in the international scene, two major developments took place during the period from 1924-27. One was the attainment of stability in the socialist Soviet Union. That was one factor. The other factor was also the temporary stability in the world capitalist order. And so what we see is that a phase of peaceful coexistence started between the capitalist countries on the one hand and the socialist Soviet Union on the other. And since it was a relatively peaceful period in the context of China also, so the capitalist countries consolidated their position, and they started making further inroads into China through their lackeys, through their stooges who had been operating in many parts of the country. Now, meanwhile, imperialist penetration into an oppression of the Chinese people seriously hampered China's national revolution. Warlordism developed, It had a phenomenal growth during that point of time. Each of the warlords we have pointed out was under the control of some imperialist power, and the imperialist powers took advantage of the situation, and they played off one group against the other, and they took advantage of the internal crisis within China. And that was one side of the picture, and on the other side there was resistance against, of course, against imperialist penetration through their Chinese agents. In March 1923, Sun Yat-sen set up a revolutionary government in Kuomintang, and he had by then formulated his three major policies. We have already referred to the three major policies. And the main elements of the three major policies were that they should jointly fight against feudalism and imperialism, and there should be the establishment of a broad democratic government by gathering all revolutionary forces, progressive forces, under one political umbrella. So that, of course, so a united front was forged between the two. Now there were two other developments. One was the signing of a Treaty of Friendship with the Soviet Union. That was on 31st May 1924. That was one. And the second was the formation of a revolutionary army. We have already referred to the Whampoa Military Academy, and after that there was a formation of a revolutionary army which was known as the Kuomintang Revolutionary Army. And it was this Kuomintang Revolutionary Army which was to lead the Chinese people against the northern warlords and free China from feudalism and imperialist control. Military preparations had been going on to initiate the northern expedition against the northern warlords. And these northern warlords were the main instruments of imperialist control into China, as we have pointed out earlier. The march of the Revolutionary Army was very swift. And from July to December 1926, a number of provinces such as Hunan, Hubei, Fujian, Zhejiang, Jiangxi, Anhui, all these fell to the revolutionary forces. And the situation became such that national unity could be achieved within a short period of time by defeating the northern warlords, and that possibility appeared to be very real by then. But the point is that the revolutionary forces did not stand united. Serious disagreements cropped up among the forces, and one crucial factor here was, of course, the death of Sun Yat-sen in 1925. The death of Sun Yat-sen was followed by the coming of Chiang Kai-shek to power. He usurped the power. He was very much anti-communist, totally unlike Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen was very much pro-communist party, as we know. After the coming of Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang party itself underwent a metamorphosis, and in place of a revolutionary organization, it degenerated into a reactionary organization. All the top positions, top posts were filled up. The post of the commander-in-chief and other top posts, these were filled up by Chiang Kai-shek with his own men. And so the revolutionary forces got divided, split up. On the one hand, there was the Communist Party and the progressive forces within the Kuomintang, particularly Kuomintang Guards Regiment, which played an important part in the northern expedition. That was the one side, and they had their center, revolution center, at a place called Wuhan. And on the other hand, at Nanking, there was a center of counter-revolution under the dictatorship of Chiang Kai-shek. The advance of the Northern Expeditionary Army was followed by an uprising of the workers in Shanghai. That was in February 1927. This alarmed the foreign imperialist powers of Britain, Japan, and the US. And then in April 1927, Chiang Kai-shek sent his own troops, backed by the foreign forces, and killed workers and peasants in thousands. That was the Shanghai massacre. After that, there was the Nanking massacre, Canton massacre, and also the massacre of the peasantry in the countryside. So it was these massacres which ultimately brought the First United Front to an end.
How did the Kuomintang party become a reactionary party?
Kuomintang party was a progressive revolutionary party when Sun Yat-sen was at the helm of affairs. But after his death, it changed its character. one reason, of course, which I have pointed out was that Chiang Kai-shek himself, he was a very much an anti-communist. And in fact, there is a book by Harold Isaacs, The Tragedy of the Chinese Revolution. And in that book, he writes that Chiang Kai-shek was connected with Shanghai's Huang Qing-wan gang, which was notorious lord of the underworld in the French concession of Shanghai. He was very much connected with the underworld, and he, according to Isaacs, he passed on secret information, internal information, both of the Kuomintang party, and he received money also from them. That is one thing, and Sun Yat-sen, of course, did not know anything about it. And another was that when Chiang Kai-shek came to power, he became the top man within the Kuomintang. He filled top positions with men who belonged to the feudal class, the comprador bourgeois class, and Chiang Kai-shek himself was a very rich man. He was very much connected with the business world also, compradorial activities he also had. So he was not a national bourgeois, he represented a comprador section of the Chinese bourgeoisie. And so these were the reasons why a progressive party like the Kuomintang under Sun Yat-sen could transform itself into a reactionary party under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek after Sun Yat-sen's death. We have already referred to the massacre of 1927. In fact, long before the massacre of 1927, Mao had been very busy carrying on ideological debates with Chen Tu-siu and his associates over such questions as the revolutionary role of the peasantry, over the forging of the united front between the workers and the peasants, creation of base areas, revolutionary base areas in the countryside, and for keeping the initiative of the CPC in their own hands. These were some of the very vital questions with which Mao had been carrying on debates with Chen Tu-siu. Chen Tu-siu, on the other hand, was more interested in making compromises with the landlords and the comprador bourgeoisie than in leading the revolution. His view was that revolution would be led by the Kuomintang. We should also make compromises with the landlords and the comprador bourgeoisie. That was Chen Tu-siu's view. Mao, of course, fought against this rightist deviation of Chen Tu-siu, and apart from Chen Tu-siu, he also fought against some left deviations of Chiang Kuo-tao and Lili San. Chiang Kuo-tao and Lili San argued that it was no use to forge any alliance with the peasantry because the peasantry as a class was very backward. They were spontaneous capitalists also. So we should have nothing to do with the peasantry. So they were also against forging any alliance with the peasantry. And so these were the two thinkings. One was capitulationist thinking, another was a sectarian thinking. And Mao had to fight against both these tendencies within the CPC. The fifth Congress of the CPC took place in the face of the counter-revolutionary onslaughts by the Kuomintang, and faced with the attacks by the Kuomintang, Chen Tu-siu got frightened, and he was even willing to disarm the masses and surrender to the Kuomintang. At the Congress, Mao spoke in favor of continuing the revolution, continuing the fight against the landlords. Mao was criticized by the others for making excesses which were done by the peasants. And so there were weaknesses and internal dissensions within the Communist Party of China. Of course, Chiang Kai-shek took advantage of these weaknesses within the CPC, and he carried on massacres, killing thousands of people, workers, peasants, students, women, both men and women, as also the members of the Communist Party of China. And this finally marked the end of the United Front. After the end of the United Front, the Wuhan Revolutionary Center that disappeared. The leaders of the Kuomintang, most of them had already betrayed the entire heritage of Sun Yat-sen, and there was only one person possibly who was Sung Ching-ling, Sun Yat-sen's widow. He and a few others, they continued to stand by his principles. Now, at that critical juncture, CPC set out to salvage the revolution from defeat by organizing an armed uprising in Nanchang. That was in Kiangsi, August 1927, with more than 30,000 troops under the command of Chou Enlai and Chute. Although it was ultimately defeated, this uprising had great historical significance. It marked the beginning of the struggle of the revolutionary armed forces and under the sole leadership of the CPC against counter-revolution. And it also marked the birth of the People's Army in China. So that was, despite the failure, that was his big success. There was also an emergency conference where decisions was taken for the autumn harvest uprising to take advantage of the harvesting season. We did not explain why that was very important. Harvesting season was very important. Anyway, but it was also decided that if it would fail, if in case it failed, then they would shift the whole revolutionary forces to the Qingkang Mountains on the Hunan, Kiangsi, Fujian border region, where base areas were to be set up. The Nanchang Rising was followed by the Canton Uprising in December 1927. Under the leadership of the CPC, a democratic government was set up. Then there were attacks by the foreign armies, not only by Kuomintang armies, Chiang Kai-shek's armies, but also by foreign armies, and so it also was defeated. And then the failure of the autumn harvest uprising again, which was to start in many provinces in the countryside. It compelled Mao to take refuge in the isolated mountain range of the Qingkang Shan, along with his Chute, and where new base areas were created.